The thugs thought the bar was empty. Their laughter died the moment a voice from the shadows said, "Let her go." The man who stepped out wasn't a customer. He was the Mafia boss who owned the city's silence. And tonight, they'd touched what was his. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. The night had been long, and Ann Weaver was counting the minutes until closing time. The soft glow of hanging lamps reflected off half-empty glasses scattered across the wooden bar, and the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the comfortable silence. Outside, the city breathed its midnight rhythm, calm and unaware. She was wiping down the last of the counter, humming a tune she couldn't quite name, ready to flip the sign and walk out into the cool autumn air. But sometimes the universe has a different script written, the kind that turns ordinary nights into something you'll never forget. Because just as Anne reached for the ring of keys hanging by the register, the door swung open with a creak that shouldn't have been there. 3 men stumbled inside, their laughter too loud, their movements too loose. The one in front, wearing a red and black flannel shirt, grinned as his boots thudded heavily against the worn floorboards. "Bar's closed, fellas," Anne said, keeping her voice steady and polite. The man's grin widened, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Then why are the lights still on?" he asked, his tone mocking. His 2 companions followed close behind, one in a black leather jacket with a swagger that reeked of cheap beer, the other quieter but watching her with eyes that made her skin crawl. Their shadows stretched long across the floor under the amber light. Anne's pulse quickened. She glanced at the clock mounted above the liquor shelf. 12 minutes past midnight. The regulars were gone. The jukebox had stopped playing an hour ago. The owner had left 2 hours earlier, trusting her to close up like she always did. She was alone. The Marigold Bar had been her second home for 3 years now. She knew every scratch on the wooden counter, every creaky floorboard, every story behind the faded photographs on the walls. It was a neighborhood place, the kind where people came not just for drinks, but for conversation, for warmth, for a moment of peace in a chaotic world. Tonight, though, something felt different. Wrong. Anne tried again, keeping her hands busy, folding a dish rag with forced calm. "Gentlemen, we're closed for the night. You'll have to come back tomorrow." But the man in the flannel only laughed a harsh, grating sound. "Closed?" he repeated, sliding onto a bar stool uninvited. "We're just getting started, sweetheart." One of them, the one in the leather jacket, leaned against the bar, pretending to inspect the bottles lined up on the shelf. His fingers drummed against the wood in an irritating rhythm. The third man, wearing dark jeans and a cruel smirk, drifted toward the side, positioning himself between Anne and the back door, blocking her exit. The air grew thick, suffocating. Anne's mind raced. She thought of the late-night stories she'd heard from other waitresses, the ones who'd faced men like this and barely escaped. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Some people walk into your life to hurt you. Some walk in to save you. You just never know which until it's too late." "Look," Anne said, her voice firmer now despite the tremor underneath. "I don't want any trouble. I'm asking you politely to leave." The man in the flannel leaned forward, his elbows on the bar, his face too close. "And I'm asking you politely to pour us a drink." His breath reeked of whiskey and cigarettes. 3 whiskeys, top shelf. "I can't do that. We're closed and I need you to go." His smile disappeared. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You know what your problem is?" he said slowly, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know how to be friendly." The man in the leather jacket chuckled. "Maybe she needs us to teach her some manners." Anne's heart hammered against her ribs. She took a small step back, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone in her apron pocket. But before she could pull it out, the man in the flannel moved faster than she expected. His hand shot across the bar and grabbed her wrist tight, painful. "Where do you think you're going?" he growled. "Let go of me," Anne said, trying to pull free, but his grip was iron. "Or what?" He laughed again, and his friends joined in. "You gonna call the cops? By the time they get here, we'll be long gone. Right, boys?" The other 2 nodded, their grins widening. Anne's eyes darted around the room looking for anything she could use, any way out. The front door seemed a mile away. The back exit was blocked. The phone behind the bar was out of reach. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that they weren't alone. In the farthest booth, hidden in the shadows where the light barely reached, a man sat perfectly still. His untouched glass of whiskey sat on the table before him, the ice long since melted. He had been there all evening, watching, listening, waiting. He always waited until the lights went out. His name was Donnie Palos, and he had just seen enough. The grip on Anne's wrist tightened, and she could feel her pulse throbbing against his calloused fingers. Pain shot up her arm, but she refused to cry out. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're hurting me." The man in the flannel leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "Am I?" he said mockingly. "Good. Maybe now you'll learn to be more hospitable." The other two men had spread out now, circling like predators who'd cornered their prey. The one in the leather jacket ran his fingers along the edge of the bar, knocking over an empty glass. It rolled across the counter and shattered on the floor behind Anne, making her flinch. "Oops," he said with exaggerated innocence. "Looks like you got a mess to clean up, sweetheart." The third man, the quiet one who'd been blocking the back door, finally spoke. His voice was softer than the others, but somehow that made it worse. "You know, we've been watching this place for a while. You close up alone every Tuesday night, don't you?" Anne's blood ran cold. They'd been watching her, planning this. "Smart girl like you," he continued, stepping closer. "Working late, all by yourself. You should really be more careful." The man in the flannel finally released her wrist, but only to reach across and tap his knuckles against the bar top once, twice, 3 times. "So here's how this is gonna go," he said, his tone shifting from mocking to businesslike. "You're gonna open that register. Then you're gonna pour us those drinks I asked for. And maybe, just maybe, we'll leave without making this uglier than it needs to be." Anne rubbed her wrist, feeling the bruises already forming beneath the skin. Her mind raced through her options. The register had maybe $200 in it, tips and a handful of bills. Would giving them that be enough? Would they actually leave? But something in their eyes told her money wasn't really what they were after. They were enjoying this. The fear, the power, the control. "The register's already been counted and locked," Anne lied, her voice steadier than she felt. "The owner took the deposit earlier." The man in the flannel's expression darkened. "You think I'm stupid?" He slammed his palm against the bar, making the remaining glasses rattle. "Open it. Now, I'm telling you the truth." "Don't lie to me," he roared, and suddenly his hand shot out again, this time grabbing a fistful of her red blouse. He yanked her forward, and Anne heard the fabric tear near the collar, a sharp, sickening rip that seemed to echo through the silent bar. She gasped, stumbling, her hands flying up to hold the torn fabric together. Humiliation flooded through her, hot and overwhelming, mixing with the fear until she could barely breathe. The 3 men burst into laughter, cruel, delighted laughter that filled every corner of the room. "Look at that," the one in the leather jacket said between fits of laughter. "She's blushing. How cute. Maybe we should help her out of that shirt," the quiet one suggested, his voice dripping with menace. "Looks like it's falling apart anyway." Anne backed away until her spine hit the shelves behind the bar. Bottles clinked together from the impact. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She thought of her mother, waiting up for her at home with a cup of tea and a crossword puzzle. She thought of her younger sister who looked up to her, who always said Anne was the bravest person she knew. "I'm not brave," Anne thought desperately. "I'm terrified." The man in the flannel rounded the bar now, his boots thudding heavily against the wooden floor. He was coming to her side into her space, the small area behind the counter that had always felt safe, protected. "Last chance," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Give us what we want, or we take it." Anne's hand fumbled behind her, searching for anything, a bottle, a knife, the phone, but her fingers found nothing useful. Just smooth wood and empty air. The other 2 men were laughing again, leaning against the bar like they were watching a show. One of them drummed his fingers against the counter in that same irritating rhythm. The other lit a cigarette, even though smoking had been banned in the bar for years. "This is taking too long," the one with the cigarette said, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "Just grab the register and let's get out of here." But the man in the flannel wasn't listening. He was staring at Anne with a look that made her stomach turn. "Nah," he said slowly. "I think we're gonna stay a while. This night just got interesting." He reached for her again, and Anne pressed herself harder against the shelves, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This was it. This was really happening, and there was no one coming to help her. No one even knew she was in danger. Except, from the far corner of the bar, in the shadows where the light barely reached, there came a sound. A soft scrape, Wood against wood. Then a footstep. The laughter stopped. All three men turned their heads toward the darkness, confusion flickering across their faces. And Anne, trembling and terrified, followed their gaze, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, had heard her silent prayers. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to hold its breath. The man in the flannel, still standing behind the bar mere inches from Anne, turned his head slowly toward the source of the sound. His cocky grin faltered, replaced by something uncertain confusion mixed with irritation. "Someone back there?" he called out, his voice trying to sound threatening but cracking slightly at the edges. No answer came. Just another footstep. Slow, deliberate, heavy. The man in the leather jacket straightened up from where he'd been leaning against the bar. "Yo, Danny," he said to his leader. "I thought you said she was alone." "She is," Danny the man in the flannel replied, but his eyes stayed fixed on the shadows. Probably just the building settling or something. But Anne knew better. She'd worked in the Marigold bar long enough to know every sound it made, every creak and groan of its old bones. That wasn't the building. That was a person. Before anyone could speak again, Danny's attention snapped back to Anne. The momentary uncertainty vanished from his face, replaced by anger, the kind of anger men wear when they feel their control slipping. "You," he said, jabbing a finger toward her chest. "You got someone hiding back there? Your boyfriend? Some hero wannabe?" "No," Anne stammered. I don't know. Don't lie to me." Danny grabbed her blouse again, this time with both hands, and shoved her hard against the shelves. More bottles rattled dangerously. One tipped over and rolled off the edge, shattering on the floor in an explosion of glass and amber liquid. Anne cried out, pain shooting through her shoulder blade where it had connected with the sharp edge of the shelf. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, tears of pain, fear, and frustration. She hated that they could see her cry, hated that they'd broken her composure. "That's what I thought," Danny said with cruel satisfaction, his face so close she could see the veins in his bloodshot eyes. Just a scared little girl playing tough. The quiet one who'd been by the door moved closer now, craning his neck to peer into the darkness at the back of the bar. "Maybe we should check it out," he suggested nervously. "Shut up, Tommy," Danny snapped without looking at him. "It's nothing. Just her trying to psyche us out." But his voice didn't sound convinced. Anne's mind raced even as her body trembled. Someone was there. Someone had stayed after closing. But who? And could they help her? Or were they just another customer who'd wandered into the worst possible situation? Danny's hands were still gripping her torn blouse when he spoke again, his voice dropping to something more sinister. "You know what happens to girls who don't cooperate?" he whispered, his breath hot against her face. "They learn the hard way." He yanked the fabric again, harder this time, and Anne heard more buttons pop and scatter across the floor. The red blouse gaped open now, revealing the white tank top underneath. The humiliation was almost worse than the fear. "Stop!" Anne finally screamed, her voice breaking. "Please, just take the money and go. Take whatever you want." The man in the leather jacket laughed that same cruel, mocking sound. "Oh, we will, sweetheart. We definitely will." Danny released her blouse only to grab her wrist again, twisting it until Anne whimpered. "Open the register," he commanded. "Now." Anne's free hand shook violently as she reached for the keys in her apron pocket. Her fingers fumbled, dropping them once before finally grasping them. Every movement felt like it was happening underwater, slow and thick and wrong. She slid the key into the register, and it popped open with a cheerful ding that felt obscene in the moment. Danny shoved her aside and began grabbing bills, stuffing them into his pockets with greedy hands. $200, he said incredulously, wheeling on her. "That's it? You're telling me this whole bar only made $200 tonight?" "Tips and late-night customers," Anne managed to say through her tears. "That's all there is, I swear." "She's lying," the quiet one, Tommy said from across the room. "Has to be more somewhere." Danny's eyes swept across the bar, landing on Anne's purse, hanging on a hook near the back door. He pointed at it. "What's in there?" "Nothing," Anne said quickly. "Just my phone and—" "Get it. Please." "Get it," Danny roared, and the violence in his voice made Anne flinch so hard she nearly collapsed. She moved on, shaking legs toward her purse, every instinct screaming at her to run, to fight, to do something, but her body felt disconnected from her brain, moving through sheer survival instinct alone. As she reached for her purse, something shifted in the shadows behind her. The footsteps came again, louder now, unmistakable. Not one person, but multiple people, moving through the darkness with purposeful intent. Danny, the man in the leather jacket, and Tommy all turned toward the sound, their earlier bravado cracking like thin ice. "Who the hell is that?" the man in the leather jacket demanded, his voice pitching higher. And then, from the deepest part of the shadows where the last booth sat cloaked in darkness, a figure began to rise, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of calm that only comes from men who've seen real violence and know exactly what they're capable of. The amber light caught him slowly, first his hands, scarred and tattooed, then his chest, covered in a black suit jacket, then his face hard, weathered, with dark eyes that held no warmth, no mercy, just cold, calculated purpose. The figure stepped fully into the light, and Anne's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen him before, the quiet man who'd been sitting in the back booth all evening. He'd ordered a single whiskey around 9 o'clock, nursed it for hours, never causing trouble, never asking for anything. She'd almost forgotten he was there. But now, seeing him stand at his full height, she realized she'd never really looked at him, not properly. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his black suit jacket perfectly. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes, God, those eyes dark and cold as a winter midnight. But it was the tattoos that made Anne's heart skip. Black ink crawled up his neck from beneath his collar, roses intertwined with thorns, framing a cross that sat just below his jawline. The kind of ink that told stories, the kind that meant something. He buttoned his suit jacket with one hand, the movement slow and deliberate, never taking his eyes off the 3 men who'd frozen mid-breath. Behind him, 2 more figures emerged from the shadows. The first was a mountain of a man, bald head, thick gray beard, shoulders like a linebacker. He wore a dark shirt that strained against his muscled frame, and his arms were covered in tattoos that disappeared beneath rolled-up sleeves. He cracked his knuckles as he walked, the sound sharp and menacing in the quiet bar. The second was younger, leaner, with slicked-back hair and an earring glinting in his left ear. He had a sharp, angular face and moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd been in more fights than he could count. A thin scar ran from his temple to his cheekbone, a souvenir from a knife that had come too close. The 3 of them stopped about 10 feet from where Danny still stood behind the bar, his hand frozen halfway to Anne's purse. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then the man in the black suit, the one with the roses on his neck, tilted his head slightly, his gaze dropping to where Danny's other hand still gripped Anne's wrist. When he spoke, his voice was low and quiet, but it carried through the room like thunder rolling across distant hills. "Let her go." 3 simple words, but they landed with the weight of a death sentence. Danny's face had gone pale, but he tried to maintain his bravado. He laughed, a weak, nervous sound. "And who the hell are you supposed to be? Her boyfriend?" The man didn't answer. He just stared, his expression utterly calm, utterly cold. The big bald man behind him crossed his arms, making his biceps bulge. The younger one slid his hands into his pockets, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Anne stood frozen, her wrist still caught in Danny's grip, feeling like she'd stumbled into something much bigger than a simple robbery. The air in the room had changed, charged with a different kind of danger now. The kind that came from men who didn't need to raise their voices to be terrifying. "I said," the man in the suit repeated, taking one slow step forward. "Let her go." Danny's grip loosened slightly, but he didn't release her. Instead, he tried to rally his courage, puffing out his chest. "You don't know who you're messing with, old man. There's 3 of us, and—" "There's 3 of us too," the bald man rumbled, his voice like gravel. "Want to see how that plays out?" The man in the leather jacket who'd been so cocky earlier took an unconscious step backward. "Danny," he said nervously, "maybe we should just—" "Shut up," Danny snapped, but his voice cracked. Sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. Tommy, the quiet one, had already begun edging toward the front door, clearly calculating his escape route. The man in the black suit took another step forward, and this time Anne could see the details she'd missed before. The way his suit jacket couldn't quite hide the powerful build beneath. The scars on his knuckles, old, white, countless. The silver ring on his right hand with an emblem she couldn't quite make out. This wasn't just some random customer. This was someone who lived in a world where violence was a language, and he was fluent. "You've got 5 seconds, he said, his dark eyes never leaving Danny's face. "To take your hands off her and walk out that door." "Or what?" Danny challenged, but his voice had lost all its earlier menace. Now it just sounded desperate. The man in the suit smiled just barely, just enough to show teeth. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted prey that didn't realize it was already caught. Or I show you why people don't walk into my bar and put their hands on my people. His bar? Anne's mind raced. She'd never seen this man before tonight. The owner was an older Italian man named Sal who rarely came in anymore. Who was this? The bald man behind him chuckled a deep, dark sound. Boss, you want me to handle this? I could use the exercise. Not yet, Frankie. The man in the suit said calmly. I want to give them a chance to make the smart choice. But Danny, foolish and proud and too stupid to recognize real danger when it stood 6 feet away, made the worst decision of his life. He tightened his grip on Anne's wrist and reached into his jacket pocket. I got a knife, he said, his voice shaking. And I'll use it. On her first, then on you. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The man in the black suit's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Something dark and final. Wrong answer, he said quietly. Then he moved. What happened next occurred so fast that Anne almost couldn't process it. The man in the black suit closed the distance between himself and Danny in 3 strides, each one measured, purposeful, like a clock ticking down to midnight. His movements were smooth, almost casual, as if he were simply walking across the bar to order a drink. But there was nothing casual about the look in his eyes. Danny's hand was still fumbling in his jacket pocket for the knife when the man reached him. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Danny's wrist, the same wrist that had been gripping Anne, and twisted. Hard. The sound that came from Danny's mouth was somewhere between a gasp and a scream. The knife clattered to the floor, forgotten, as he tried to pull away from the iron grip that held him. That's the hand you used to touch her, the man said quietly, his voice conversational, almost gentle. Remember that. He twisted again, and Danny dropped to his knees, his face contorted in agony. The man released him, and Danny scrambled backward, cradling his wrist against his chest. The entire exchange had taken maybe 5 seconds. Anne stood frozen behind the bar, her hand clutched to her torn blouse, watching with wide eyes as the man in the black suit turned his attention to the other 2 intruders. The man in the leather jacket had pulled out his phone, trying to dial with shaking hands. I'm calling the cops. The younger man with the scar, the one the bald man had called something else, moved like lightning. He crossed the room in 2 steps, plucked the phone from the leather-jacketed man's hands, and casually tossed it behind the bar. It landed in a sink full of dirty dishwater with a satisfying plunk. No cops, the scarred man said cheerfully. This is between us. Tommy had made it halfway to the door when the massive bald man, Frankie, simply stepped into his path. Tommy bounced off him like he'd run into a brick wall and stumbled backward, landing hard on his backside. Where are you going? Frankie asked, looking down at him with mock concern. Party's just getting started. The man in the black suit walked slowly toward where Danny still knelt on the floor, clutching his wrist. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the terrified thug. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice still that same quiet, controlled tone. You're going to answer some questions, and depending on your answers, you either walk out of here on your own 2 feet, or my friends carry you out. Understand? Danny nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. All his earlier bravado had evaporated like morning mist. Good. The man in the suit tilted his head slightly. First question. Have you done this before? Other bars, other waitresses? Danny hesitated, and the man's expression darkened just a fraction, but it was enough. Don't lie to me, he said softly. I can always tell when someone's lying. Yes, Danny stammered. A few times. But we never really hurt anyone. You never really hurt anyone, the man repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. He glanced back at Anne, taking in her torn blouse, her tear-stained face, the bruises already forming on her wrist. You hear that, Anne? They never really hurt anyone. It was the first time he'd said her name, and something about hearing it from his lips made Anne's knees weak. He knew her name. How long had he been watching? The man in the suit stood up slowly, towering over Danny. Here's what you don't understand, he continued, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge now sharp as broken glass. Every person who works in this bar is under my protection. This whole neighborhood is under my protection. And when you walk into my territory and put your hands on my people, you don't just disrespect her, you disrespect me. He paused, letting that sink in. And nobody, he leaned down, bringing his face close to Danny's. disrespects me and walks away without consequences. Danny was openly sobbing now, his tough guy persona completely shattered. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm sorry. I didn't know we didn't know." "No," the man agreed. "You didn't. But you do now." He straightened up and gestured to Frankie and the scarred man. "Get them up, all three of them." The two men moved with practiced efficiency, hauling Danny and his companions to their feet. The man in the leather jacket was shaking so badly his teeth were chattering. Tommy looked like he might pass out. The man in the black suit walked back toward Anne, his expression softening just slightly when he looked at her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Besides the wrist?" Anne shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Good." He pulled off his suit jacket and held it out to her. "Here. For your shirt." Anne took it with trembling hands, wrapping it around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body heat, and smelled faintly of expensive cologne and cigarette smoke. The weight of it felt like armor. The man turned back to face the three thugs, who stood huddled together like children caught stealing cookies. "Now," he said, his voice calm once more, "let me tell you exactly what's going to happen next. And I suggest you listen very, very carefully." Outside, somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Inside, the Marigold bar, the only sound was breathing harsh, panicked breathing from the three men who'd just learned what real fear felt like. And behind the bar, Anne Weaver watched the man in the black suit with wonder and confusion warring in her chest, realizing that she'd just witnessed something she'd never forget. The man in the black suit stood perfectly still, his dark eyes moving slowly from one thug to the next. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. "You're going to leave this bar," he said. "You're going to walk straight to your car, drive home, and never set foot in this neighborhood again. You're going to forget this bar exists, forget Anne exists, forget this night ever happened." Danny nodded so vigorously, his whole body shook. Yes, we'll go. Right now. We're sorry." "I'm not finished," the man said, and Danny's mouth snapped shut. "But before you go, there's the matter of payment." "Payment?" the man in the leather jacket stammered. "For the damages, the broken glass, the torn clothing, the emotional distress you've caused." He gestured casually around the bar. "And for wasting my evening." Frankie, the massive bald man, cracked his knuckles again. The sound echoed through the silent bar like gunshots. "Empty your pockets," the man in the suit commanded. "Everything. Wallets, phones, keys, whatever you took from that register. Put it on the bar. Now." The three men scrambled to comply, pulling items from their pockets with shaking hands. Bills fluttered onto the wooden bar top, the money they'd stolen, plus more from their own wallets. Phones clattered down. Keys jangled. Danny's hands were still trembling as he placed his wallet down last. The man in the suit picked up one of the wallets, flipped it open, and studied the driver's license inside. "Daniel Reeves?" He read aloud. 2447 Parkside Avenue, apartment 3B. He looked up at Danny with those cold, dark eyes. "In case you were wondering, yes, I'll remember that." Danny went even paler, if that was possible. The man in the suit tossed the wallet back onto the bar and picked up another. Eric Morrison, Tommy Vaughn. He memorized each address with barely a glance. Good. Now we all know each other. That's when Eric, the man in the leather jacket, made his mistake. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was wounded pride. Maybe he genuinely thought he could get away with it. But as the man in the suit was examining the third wallet, Eric's hand shot out toward one of the broken bottles on the floor, a jagged weapon with a sharp, glittering edge. He lunged forward with a desperate shout, swinging the broken bottle toward the man's head. The man in the suit moved like smoke. He pivoted on his heel, and Eric's wild swing missed him by inches. Before Eric could recover, the man grabbed his wrist mid-swing, the same controlled, precise movement he'd used on Danny, and twisted. The bottle fell from Eric's hand, shattering into even smaller pieces on the floor. Then, almost casually, the man drove his elbow into Eric's jaw. The crack was sickening, bone meeting bone with brutal efficiency. Eric's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings, unconscious before he hit the ground. The entire exchange had taken less than 3 seconds. Anne gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She'd seen bar fights before, sloppy, drunken brawls that were more shoving than actual fighting. But this was different. This was precise, professional, terrifying. Tommy, seeing his friend collapse, made a panicked grab for something, anything on the bar top. His fingers closed around a heavy glass ashtray, and he swung it wildly toward the man in the suit. but the scarred man who'd been standing silently by the jukebox intercepted him. He caught Tommy's wrist in midair, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him face first onto the bar, with a thud that made the glasses rattle. "Bad idea," the scarred man said conversationally, holding Tommy pinned. "Very bad idea." Danny, the only one still standing, made a desperate break for the door. He almost made it. Frankie's massive hand shot out and grabbed the back of Danny's flannel shirt, stopping him dead in his tracks. Danny's legs kept pumping for a moment, going nowhere, like a cartoon character running in place. "Where you going, tough guy?" Frankie rumbled, his voice almost amused. "Thought you wanted to party." He spun Danny around and shoved him backward. Danny stumbled, tripped over Eric's unconscious body, and landed hard on the floor. He scrambled backward on his hands and feet, crab walking away from Frankie's advancing form. "Please," Danny sobbed, all pretense of toughness completely gone. "Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We'll leave. We'll never come back. I swear." "You're right," the man in the suit said, walking over to stand above Danny. "You will leave, and you won't come back. But not before you understand something." He crouched down again, bringing himself to eye level with the terrified man. "The only reason you're still breathing," he said softly, "is because she's watching." He gestured toward Anne without taking his eyes off Danny. "She's a good person, kind-hearted, the type who believes people deserve second chances. So I'm going to give you one. Because of her, not because you deserve it. Kind-hearted." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, but Anne could still hear it in the deadly quiet of the bar. "But if I ever, and I mean ever, hear about you putting your hands on another woman, I won't be this generous. You understand me?" Danny nodded frantically, tears and snot running down his face. "Good." The man in the suit stood up, straightening his shirt. "Now get your friends and get out of my sight. You've got 30 seconds before I change my mind." Danny didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, nearly slipping on the broken glass scattered across the floor. With shaking hands, he grabbed Eric under the arms and began dragging him toward the door. Eric's head lolled to the side, still unconscious, a dark bruise already blooming along his jawline. The scarred man released Tommy, who immediately rushed to help Danny with Eric's dead weight. Together, they hauled him toward the exit, grunting with effort. Neither of them looked back. Neither of them said another word. The front door swung open with a creak that seemed too loud in the aftermath of violence. Cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the distant sounds of the city cars passing, a dog barking, life continuing as if nothing had happened. Within seconds, they were gone. The door swung shut behind them with a soft click, and then there was silence. Anne stood frozen behind the bar, still clutching the man's suit jacket around her shoulders. Her legs felt like water. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright was beginning to fade, replaced by a trembling weakness that started in her hands and spread through her entire body. She looked down and saw her fingers shaking violently. The man in the black suit whose jacket she wore, whose name she still didn't know, turned to face her. His expression had changed completely. The cold, terrifying calm was gone, replaced by something softer. Concern, maybe even gentleness. "Hey," he said quietly, taking a step toward her. "You're okay. You're safe now." Anne tried to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, a sob broke free, raw and unexpected. Then another. And suddenly she couldn't stop. 3 years of working late nights, of walking to her car alone in dark parking lots, of brushing off unwanted comments and wandering hands, of pretending she was fine when she was scared, it all came pouring out in great, gasping sobs. Her knees buckled. The man moved fast, rounding the bar in 2 strides and catching her before she hit the ground. Strong arms wrapped around her, steadying, protective, careful not to hold too tight. "I've got you," he murmured. "It's okay. Let it out." Anne collapsed against his chest, the suit jacket falling from her shoulders as she gripped his shirt with both fists. She cried into the dark fabric, leaving wet stains she'd probably be embarrassed about later. But right now she didn't care. Right now she needed to fall apart. And somehow, impossibly, this stranger, this dangerous, tattooed man who'd just beaten 3 men with terrifying efficiency, held her like she was something precious, like she mattered. Behind them, Frankie cleared his throat softly. "Boss, you want us to clean up?" The man nodded without releasing Anne. "Yeah. Get rid of the glass. Check the register. Make sure they didn't break anything important." And Frankie, Yeah, boss? Find out everything about those three. Where they work, who they know, if they've got priors. I want a full report by morning. On it. Frankie's heavy footsteps moved away, and Anne heard the sound of glass being swept up. The scarred man spoke next, his voice surprisingly gentle. She gonna be okay, Donnie? Donnie. So that was his name. She will be, Donnie replied, his hand moving in slow, soothing circles on Anne's back. Just needs a minute. Just needs a minute. Anne tried to pull herself together, tried to stop crying, but her body wouldn't listen. The fear, the humiliation, the relief, it was all too much. She felt like she was drowning in emotions she couldn't name. I'm sorry, she managed to gasp between sobs. I'm sorry, I can't. Stop apologizing, Donnie said firmly but kindly. You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. You understand me? Anne shook her head against his chest. She didn't understand. Didn't understand why this was happening, why he'd stayed, why he cared, why she felt safer in the arms of this stranger than she had in months. Listen to me. Donnie pulled back slightly, just enough to tilt her chin up with gentle fingers, so she had to meet his eyes. They were still dark, still intense, but there was warmth there now, genuine concern. What happened tonight was not your fault. You did everything right. You stayed calm, you tried to de-escalate, you survived. That takes strength. I was so scared, Anne whispered. I know. You had every right to be. But you're safe now. His thumb brushed away a tear from her cheek, such a tender gesture from hands that had just inflicted brutal violence. No one's going to hurt you. Not while I'm here. No one's going to hurt you. Behind them, the sound of sweeping continued. Glass clinked into a dustpan. Water ran in the sink. The scarred man was humming softly, something old and bluesy that seemed oddly appropriate. Anne's breathing began to slow, the sobs gradually subsiding into hiccups and shaky breaths. She became aware of how she must look red-eyed, tear-stained, still clutching a stranger's shirt like a lifeline. I don't even know you, she said, her voice small and confused. Why did you help me? Donnie was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting gently on her back. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old memories and hard-learned lessons. Because a long time ago, someone didn't help someone I cared about, and I've spent every day since making sure that doesn't happen to anyone else. Not in my neighborhood, not on my watch. There was pain in those words, deep, old pain that had scarred over but never fully healed. Anne looked up at him, really looked at him. Past the tattoos and the scars and the dangerous reputation she was beginning to understand he carried. She saw someone who'd been broken once and had decided to use those broken pieces to protect others. Thank you, she whispered. Donnie gave her a small, sad smile. You're welcome. Anne finally pulled away from Donnie's chest, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She felt embarrassed now, crying all over a stranger, falling apart like that. She'd always prided herself on being strong, on handling whatever life threw at her with grace and composure. But tonight had stripped all that away, left her raw and vulnerable. Donnie seemed to sense her discomfort. He took a step back, giving her space, but kept his eyes on her, watchful, protective. You want some water? He asked. Anne nodded, not trusting her voice yet. He moved behind the bar with the familiarity of someone who'd spent time there before, filling a glass from the tap and sliding it across to her. Anne picked it up with shaking hands and took a long drink. The cool water helped ground her, brought her back to herself. Better? Donnie asked. A little. Anne set the glass down and looked around the bar. Frankie had finished sweeping up the broken glass and was now wiping down the counter where the thugs had left their mess. The scarred man was resetting the stools they'd knocked over, moving with quiet efficiency. It was surreal, these three dangerous men cleaning up her bar like it was the most natural thing in the world. I still don't understand, Anne said finally, looking back at Donnie. You said this was your bar, but I've worked here for 3 years. The owner is Sal Benedetto. I've never seen you before tonight. Donnie leaned against the bar, crossing his arms over his broad chest. The dim light caught the tattoos on his neck again, those black roses and the cross. You've seen me, he corrected gently. You just never noticed. I come in every Tuesday night around 9. Sit in that back booth. Order a whiskey. Stay until closing. Anne's mind raced back through countless Tuesday nights. Had he really been there? Every week? She started, then trailed off. I don't remember. You're not supposed to, Donnie said with a faint smile. That's the point. I don't come here to be noticed. I come here to make sure nights like this don't happen. But why? Why this bar? Why Tuesday nights? Donnie was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes distant, looking at something Anne couldn't see. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and weighted with history. Sal Benedetto is an old friend. We grew up together, few blocks from here. When he bought this place 20 years ago, he asked me to keep an eye on it, make sure nobody caused trouble. He paused, running a hand over his jaw. And Tuesday nights are when his daughter used to work the closing shift. Something in the way he said, used to, made Anne's chest tighten. What happened to her? She asked softly. Donnie's expression darkened. 6 years ago, 3 men came into this bar after closing. She was alone. He stopped, his jaw clenching. By the time anyone found her, it was too late. Anne's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Her name was Isabella, Donnie continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Izzy. She was 24, smart, funny, wanted to be a teacher. She had her whole life ahead of her. He looked down at his scarred knuckles. I was out of town that night. If I'd been here. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Anne felt tears prickling her eyes again, but for a different reason now. I'm so sorry. So am I, Donnie said. Every single day, but sorry doesn't bring her back. All I can do is make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. That's why I'm here every Tuesday. That's why I never leave until the lights go out and everyone's safe. Anne understood now. The protective vigilance, the controlled violence, the way he'd moved without hesitation, it all made sense. He wasn't just some random stranger who'd happened to be in the right place at the right time. He was a man carrying the weight of a promise he'd made to a ghost. Does Sal know you're still doing this? Anne asked. Donnie shook his head. Sal sold me this bar 4 years ago. Couldn't stand to run it anymore after what happened to Izzy. Too many memories. But I never told him I bought it. As far as he knows, it went to some investment group. He gestured around the quiet space. I kept everything the same. Same name, same decor, same staff schedule. Only thing I changed was making sure nobody works closing shift alone. There's always supposed to be at least 2 people here. Anne's stomach dropped. There were supposed to be 2 of us tonight. Jenny was scheduled, but she called in sick at the last minute. I told her it was fine, that I could handle it alone. Her voice cracked. I should have closed early. I should have... Stop, Donnie interrupted firmly. You didn't do anything wrong. You made a reasonable decision. How could you have known? Frankie approached then, wiping his hands on a bar towel. Place is clean, boss. Register's intact. That broken bottle cut up the floor mat pretty good, but nothing we can't replace. Good. Thanks, Frankie. The scarred man joined them, pulling out a pack of cigarettes before remembering where he was and tucking them away again. Those 3 won't be a problem anymore. Word'll spread fast about what happens to people who mess with your places. Your places? Anne asked, looking at Donnie. You own more than just this bar? Donnie shrugged. A few businesses in the neighborhood, the diner on 5th, the laundromat on Cooper Street, the convenience store over on Maple. Places where people work late, where they might be vulnerable. I make sure they're protected. Who are you? Anne whispered, though she was beginning to piece it together. The way the other 2 called him, boss. The tattoos, the controlled violence, the network of protection. Donnie met her eyes steadily. My name is Donnie Palos. People in this neighborhood call me other things, some respectful, some not so much. But what matters is this. I protect what's mine. And everyone who works in this bar, including you, falls under that protection, has from the day you started. Anne felt something shift in her chest, a strange mixture of fear and gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. This man was dangerous. That much was obvious. But he was dangerous in the service of something good, something noble. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything. Donnie straightened up, glancing at the clock on the wall. Nearly 1 a.m. But you do need to go home. Get some rest. Process all this. Take tomorrow night off if you need to. I can't just not show up for my shift. Anne. Donnie's voice was gentle but firm. You own this bar. You can do whatever you want. She blinked. What? He smiled a real smile this time, warm and genuine. I'm just the guy who makes sure it stays safe. But as far as the paperwork's concerned, you, Jenny, and the other staff are all listed as co-owners. Profit sharing, health insurance, the whole thing. Didn't Sal tell you when he sold the place? Anne's mind reeled. She'd wondered why her paychecks had suddenly gotten bigger 4 years ago. Why she'd suddenly had benefits she'd never had before. She'd assumed Sal had just gotten better business loans or something. I don't understand. Why would you do that? Because good people shouldn't have to struggle, Donnie said simply. And you're good people, Anne. You've always been kind to every customer who walks through that door. You remember their drinks, ask about their families, make this place feel like home. That's worth protecting. That's worth investing in. Anne felt fresh tears threatening, but these were different tears of overwhelming gratitude and disbelief. Before she could respond, Donnie picked up his suit jacket from where it had fallen and draped it back over her shoulders. Come on, I'll walk you to your car. The cool night air hit Anne's face as Donnie pushed open the front door of the Marigold bar. The street was quiet, bathed in the orange glow of streetlights. A few cars passed in the distance, their taillights fading into the darkness. Anne pulled Donnie's jacket tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt with her torn blouse underneath. The fabric smelled like him expensive cologne mixed with something earthy, like leather and smoke. It was oddly comforting. Where are you parked? Donnie asked, his eyes scanning the street with practiced vigilance. Around the corner, Anne said, pointing toward the small parking lot behind the neighboring building. I always park in the same spot. Not anymore, Donnie said immediately. Starting tomorrow, you park right in front, under the streetlight, where everyone can see. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order given with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps echoing off the pavement. Frankie and the scarred man followed at a discreet distance, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give them privacy. Who are they? Anne asked, nodding back toward the two men. Your friends? Family, Donnie corrected. Not by blood, but by choice. Frankie's been with me for 15 years, got him out of a bad situation, and he's had my back ever since. And that's Marco. He gestured to the scarred man. Saved my life 3 years ago. Took a knife meant for me. That's where he got the scar. Anne glanced back at Marco, who caught her looking and gave her a small, reassuring nod. And you all do. What exactly? Anne asked carefully, not sure she wanted to know the answer. Donnie was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. We keep the neighborhood safe, handle problems the police can't or won't deal with, make sure good people can live their lives without fear. He looked down at her. I know what you're thinking, that we're criminals, mobsters. Maybe we are, by some definitions. But we have rules. We don't hurt innocent people. We don't sell drugs to kids. We don't exploit the vulnerable. We protect them. They reached her car, a modest sedan that had seen better days. Anne fumbled in her apron pocket for her keys, her hands still shaking slightly. Let me, Donnie said gently, taking the keys from her trembling fingers. He unlocked the car, opened the driver's door, and checked the back seat before stepping aside. Old habits, Anne realized. He'd probably been doing security checks like this for years. Anne slid into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. She looked up at Donnie, who stood in the open doorway, one hand resting on the roof of her car. What happens now? She asked. To those men, Danny and his friends. Donnie's expression hardened slightly. They won't bother you again, I promise you that. But what are you going to do to them? Nothing they don't deserve, Donnie said. But Anne, you don't need to worry about that. That's my burden to carry, not yours. I don't want you to hurt them because of me, Anne said quickly. I mean, they're horrible, and they scared me. But, Anne... Donnie crouched down so he was at eye level with her. This isn't about revenge. This is about making sure they never do to another woman what they tried to do to you tonight. Frankie's going to dig into their backgrounds. If they've done this before, and I'm willing to bet they have, we'll make sure the right evidence ends up in the right hands. Police, prosecutors, victims who were too scared to come forward. We'll give them the justice they deserve. And if they haven't done it before, then they get a warning they'll never forget. And we keep tabs on them. If they step out of line again, anywhere in this city, we'll know. And next time, I won't be as generous. Anne studied his face, the hard lines, the cold determination in his eyes, but also the underlying code of honor that seemed to guide everything he did. You really meant it, she said softly. What you said in the bar, about protecting people because someone you cared about wasn't protected. Every word, Donnie confirmed. Isabella wasn't just Sal's daughter. She was like a little sister to me. I taught her how to ride a bike, helped her with her homework, walked her to school when we were kids. and I failed her when she needed me most. It wasn't your fault. Fault doesn't matter, Donnie interrupted. What matters is that she's gone and I'm still here, so I do what I can with the time I have left. I make sure other Isabellas get to go home safe, get to become teachers, get to live the lives they're supposed to live. Anne felt her throat tighten with emotion. Behind them, a car pulled up to the curb, and 2 men got out older, wearing suits despite the late hour. They spotted Donnie, and their faces went pale. "Mr. Palos," one of them said nervously, approaching with his hands visible. "We didn't know you'd be here. We were just leaving," Donnie finished, standing up to his full height. His voice had gone cold again. The warmth he'd shown Anne completely vanished. "This block is closed for business tonight. Spread the word." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." The 2 men practically ran back to their car, tires squealing as they pulled away. Anne watched them go, her eyes wide. "Who were they?" "Nobody important," Donnie said dismissively. "Small-time bookies looking for customers. They know better than to operate on my blocks." "Your blocks," Anne repeated. "How many blocks do you control?" Donnie smiled faintly. "Enough. Now, you should get going. It's late, and your mother's probably worried." Anne blinked in surprise. "How did you know I live with my mother?" "I know a lot of things, Anne. It's my job to know." He stepped back from the car. "Drive safe. Text me when you get home." "I don't have your number." Donnie pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. Simple black card, embossed silver numbers, nothing else. "Only give this to people you trust absolutely," he said. "And Anne, if you ever feel unsafe, day or night, you call that number. I don't care if it's 3 a.m, or if you just have a weird feeling about someone. You call me, and I'll be there." Anne took the card, running her thumb over the raised numbers. It felt heavy, weighted with promise and protection. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Donnie nodded once, then stepped back and closed her car door gently. Through the window, she saw him gesture to Frankie and Marco, who took up positions at either end of the street watching, guarding, making sure she got out safely. Anne started her car, her hands steadier now, and pulled out of the parking lot. In her rearview mirror, she could see Donnie standing under the streetlight, watching her go, his figure dark and solid against the orange glow. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how this night would change her life. But as she drove through the quiet streets toward home, clutching the black card in one hand and wearing a stranger's suit jacket, Anne Weaver realized something profound. Sometimes the monsters we fear are the ones who save us. And sometimes, angels really do wear black and carry the weight of broken promises in their scarred knuckles. If you felt that moment, that fragile calm after fear, that unexpected grace from unlikely heroes, don't scroll past. Subscribe. Not for me, but for every soul who's ever needed someone to stand up when the world looked away. Because stories like this remind us that protection can come from the most unexpected places. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold when Anne pulled into her driveway. Her mother's bedroom light was still on, of course it was. Margaret Weaver never slept until her daughter was home safe. Anne sat in her car for a moment, staring at the familiar house with its weathered blue shutters and the garden gnome her father had placed by the front steps 20 years ago. Everything looked the same as it had when she'd left for work yesterday evening, but she felt different, changed in ways she was still trying to understand. The front door opened before she'd even gotten out of the car, and her mother appeared on the porch, wrapped in her floral bathrobe, her gray hair in curlers. "Anne Marie Weaver," she called out, her voice a mixture of relief and reproach. "Do you have any idea what time it is? I've been worried sick." Anne climbed out of the car slowly, still wearing Donnie's suit jacket over her torn blouse. She'd wrapped it tightly enough that her mother wouldn't see the damage underneath. Not yet. She wasn't ready to explain everything that had happened. "I'm sorry, Mom," Anne said as she walked up the front steps. "There was an incident at the bar. It took longer than usual to close up." Margaret's eyes narrowed with a mother's intuition, taking in her daughter's red-rimmed eyes, her pale face, the expensive men's jacket that definitely didn't belong to her. "What kind of incident?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Anne lied, then immediately felt guilty for it. "Well, nothing that didn't get handled. I'm fine, Mom. Really." Margaret didn't look convinced, but she held the door open. "Come inside. I'll make us some tea." The kitchen was warm and familiar, smelling of the chamomile sachet her mother always kept by the window. Anne sank into her usual chair at the small wooden table while Margaret busied herself with the kettle, her movements precise and practiced from decades of making tea to soothe whatever troubles her daughters brought home. "Are you going to tell me what really happened?" Margaret asked, not turning around. "Or are we going to pretend that jacket is yours and those aren't tears on your face?" Anne's resolve crumbled. She started talking slowly at first, then faster, the words tumbling out in a rush. She told her mother everything: the 3 men, the fear, the torn blouse, and then Donnie, the mysterious man who'd been watching over her every Tuesday for years without her knowing, who'd stepped out of the shadows like something from a movie, who'd protected her with terrifying efficiency and unexpected gentleness. Margaret listened without interrupting, her hands steady as she poured the tea. Only when Anne finished did she speak. "Donnie Palos," Margaret said quietly, setting a steaming cup in front of her daughter. "I know that name." Anne looked up in surprise. "You do?" "Every shopkeeper and business owner in this neighborhood knows that name." Margaret sat down across from Anne, wrapping her hands around her own cup. "When your father died and the insurance money ran out, I thought we'd lose the house. Couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments, not on my salary alone. Then one day I got a letter from the bank saying my loan had been restructured. Lower interest rate, payments I could actually afford. I asked who'd arranged it, but they wouldn't tell me. Just said it had been taken care of by a community investor." She took a sip of her tea, her eyes distant with memory. "A few months later, Mrs. Chen from the laundromat told me the same thing happened to her when her husband got sick, and Mr. Rodriguez at the corner store, and the Patels who run the pharmacy." Margaret looked at her daughter. Nobody could prove it, but everyone knew. Donnie Palos was buying up businesses and properties in the neighborhood, restructuring debts, keeping families from losing everything. Never asked for anything in return except that we keep running our businesses, keep the neighborhood alive. Anne felt something tighten in her chest. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to feel beholden to a man with his reputation." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Donnie Palos is many things, Anne. Protector, yes. Benefactor, certainly, but he's also dangerous. He lives in a world of violence and consequences that people like us can barely imagine. I didn't want you getting tangled up in that world." "I think I'm already tangled up in it," Anne said quietly. She pulled out the black card Donnie had given her, sliding it across the table. "He gave me this. Said to call if I ever need help." Margaret picked up the card, studying it for a long moment. When she looked up, her expression was complicated, fear and gratitude, and resignation all mixed together. "Your grandmother used to say that God puts people in our path for a reason," Margaret said. "Sometimes those people are angels in white robes. Sometimes they're angels in battle armor. The form doesn't matter. What matters is that they show up when we need them." "Do you think that's what he is?" Anne asked. "An angel in battle armor?" "I think," Margaret said carefully, "that he's a man trying to atone for something, and whether that makes him an angel or something else, only God knows. But Anne, sweetheart," she reached across the table to take her daughter's hand, "you be careful with this. Men like Donnie Palos, they carry heavy burdens, and sometimes the people close to them end up carrying those burdens too." Anne nodded, understanding the warning but also understanding something deeper. She'd felt safer in Donnie's arms tonight than she had in years, and that meant something. It had to. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their tea as the sun continued to rise outside. Finally, Margaret stood up and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Get some sleep," she said. "We'll talk more when you wake up." Anne climbed the stairs to her bedroom, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She laid Donnie's suit jacket carefully over her desk chair, planning to return it the next time she saw him. But as she was about to collapse into bed, something made her check the pockets. In the inside pocket, she found a small folded note. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The handwriting was bold, masculine, precise. "Anne, keep the jacket. Get the shirt fixed or buy a new one. Receipts in the other pocket. Don't come back to work until you feel ready. Take all the time you need. Your shifts are covered. The 3 men from tonight won't bother you again. I made sure of it. You asked me once why I stay until the lights go out. It's because darkness is when the wolves come out, and someone needs to stand between them and the sheep. You're not a sheep, Anne. You're brave and strong and better than you know. But everyone needs someone watching their back sometimes. I'll be watching yours. P.S. There's a security camera being installed at the bar tomorrow. Back exit too. No one works alone anymore. Ever." Anne sank onto her bed, the note clutched in her hands, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. But these weren't tears of fear or pain. They were tears of overwhelming relief, the kind that comes when you realize you're not as alone as you thought you were. She folded the note carefully and placed it in her nightstand drawer, then finally let herself fall into bed. As sleep pulled her under, her last conscious thought was of dark eyes and scarred knuckles and a voice saying, "You're safe now." Outside her window, the city was waking up. People were starting their days, going to work, living their lives. They didn't know about the battle that had been fought in a quiet bar the night before, didn't know about the man who moved through shadows to keep them safe. But Anne knew. And she carried that knowledge like a secret flame in her chest, warm and bright and strangely comforting. Because that night, Anne Weaver had learned that angels don't always wear white. Sometimes they walk in shadows, wearing black suits and tattoos, carrying the weight of promises they couldn't keep and vows they'll never break. Sometimes they speak in quiet voices that carry the threat of violence and the promise of protection in equal measure. And sometimes, just sometimes, those angels show up exactly when you need them most. The morning sun streamed through her curtains, painting everything gold. Anne smiled faintly, pulled the blankets up to her chin, and finally, let herself rest. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse apartment overlooking the neighborhood he protected, Donnie Palos stood at his window, a glass of whiskey in his scarred hand. He hadn't slept, probably wouldn't, but that was okay. Sleep was for people who didn't have promises to keep and wolves to hunt. He raised his glass toward the sunrise, toward the neighborhood spread out below him, toward all the Annes and Isabellas who deserved to live without fear. "Not on my watch," he murmured to the empty room. And somewhere, in the space between darkness and light, a ghost named Isabella smiled and whispered back, "Thank you. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end." If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.